My brother laughed at my handmade gifts, calling them trash for people who failed at life in front of the entire family. He didn't know Grandpa Oscar was awake and listening. I left in tears, but the next morning, my brother's scream of pure agony woke the neighbors. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss the fallout. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The exhaustion was a physical weight, dragging at my eyelids and settling deep in the marrow of my bones. It was the kind of tired that coffee couldn't touch, born from 3 weeks of sleepless nights, sanding wood until my fingers were raw and stitching fabric until my vision blurred. I sat in my beat-up sedan, the engine idling with a rhythmic shudder that vibrated through the steering wheel, staring up at the imposing iron gates of my parents' estate. Snow was falling softly, dusting the hood of my car, a stark contrast to the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Christmas Eve was supposed to be a time of warmth, of reunion, of laying down burdens. But for me, for the last 5 years, it had felt more like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided, and the punishment was indifference. I glanced at the backseat. 3 carefully wrapped boxes sat there, adorned with hand-tied ribbons and sprigs of dried holly I'd harvested myself. They weren't wrapped in the shimmering, metallic paper my mother, Margaret, preferred, the kind that cost $12 a roll. They were wrapped in brown butcher paper I had hand-stamped with gold ink. Inside weren't iPads or designer watches. Inside were months of my life. Inside was my heart, distilled into objects I hoped would finally prove that I belonged here, even if my bank account didn't match theirs. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Margaret. "We're starting cocktails in 10. Anthony is already here. Try not to track slush into the foyer this time." I swallowed the lump in my throat. No drive safe, no can't wait to see you. Just a reminder of my clumsiness and the implicit comparison to Anthony. Anthony, the golden boy. Anthony, who probably flew in first class while I counted change for gas. I turned off the ignition, the silence of the winter night rushing in to fill the cabin. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes, and my hair was pulled back in a messy bun that I hadn't had time to style properly. I was a special education teacher. My days were spent in the trenches of patience and empathy, wiping tears and celebrating inchstones of progress. It was noble work, fulfilling work, but in the ecosystem of my family, it was viewed as a quaint hobby that didn't pay the dividends of real success. "You can do this, Emma," I whispered to the empty car, my breath fogging the glass. "Just get through dinner, give the gifts, survive." I reached back and grabbed the boxes, hugging them to my chest like armor. I stepped out into the biting cold, the wind whipping through my thin coat, another remnant of my budget restrictions. As I walked toward the front door, the golden glow of the chandelier spilled out through the massive windows, illuminating the perfect life inside. I could see silhouettes moving, glasses raised in a toast I wasn't part of. I didn't know it then, standing on that frozen driveway, but this wasn't just another painful holiday. This was the end of everything I had known. The betrayal waiting for me inside wasn't just a snide comment or a cold shoulder. It was a demolition of my dignity that would leave me gasping for air. But as I reached for the brass knocker, polished to a mirror shine, I felt a strange flicker of intuition. A quiet voice in the back of my mind that whispered, the betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The heavy oak door swung open before I could even knock, revealing Margaret. She was impeccable, as always. Her silver dress shimmered like liquid mercury, and her hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection that defied gravity. She held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand, her manicured nails tapping against the glass. "You're late, Emma," she said, not moving aside to let me in immediately. Her eyes raked over my coat, pausing on the scuffed toes of my boots. "And you look tired." "Hi, Mom. Merry Christmas," I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. I stepped past her, the warmth of the foyer hitting me like a physical wall. It smelled of expensive pine candles and roasting meat, the scent of money. The roads were slick, and I had to finish grading papers before I left. Always working so hard for so little, she sighed, closing the door behind me. Anthony arrived an hour ago. He brought the most exquisite wine from his trip to Tuscany. You really should ask him about it. Maybe you'll learn something about tea palate refinement. I bit my tongue, tasting the metallic tang of restraint. I'll be sure to do that. I walked into the living room, the heels of my boots clacking loudly on the marble floor. The room was a masterpiece of interior design, dominated by a 12-foot spruce tree dripping with crystal ornaments. And there, holding court by the fireplace, was Anthony. He looked like he had stepped out of a catalog for yacht owners. His suit was tailored to within an inch of its life, emphasizing his gym-honed physique. He held a tumbler of scotch in one hand, gesturing broadly as he spoke to a rapt audience of distant cousins and neighbors. So I told the zoning board. Anthony's voice boomed, smooth and confident. If you want this development to revitalize the district, you need to let me bypass the height restriction. And of course, once I mentioned the potential tax revenue, they practically handed me the permit. Laughter rippled through the room. Margaret beamed, rushing to his side and placing a hand on his arm. "Oh, Anthony, you're terrible, but so brilliant." I stood in the archway, clutching my brown paper packages, feeling invisible. It was always like this. Anthony sucked the oxygen out of every room, leaving everyone else to suffocate in his shadow. Then, movement in the corner caught my eye. Grandpa Oscar was sitting in his high-backed leather armchair, the one positioned slightly away from the main cluster of sofas. A tartan blanket was draped over his legs, and his eyes were closed, his head lolling slightly to the side. He looked frail, much frailer than the last time I'd seen him. His breathing was shallow, a soft rattle in his chest. "Is Grandpa okay?" I asked, stepping further into the room. Anthony stopped mid-sentence and glanced over, his expression flicking from annoyance at the interruption to a mask of pity. "Oh, hey, Emma, didn't see you there. He's fine, just old. He's been drifting in and out all day. Hardly knows where he is half the time." "He barely touched his dinner," Margaret added, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "The doctor says it's just a matter of time now. We're managing." I felt a sharp pang of grief. Grandpa Oscar was the only one who had ever made me feel seen in this house. He was a man who had built his fortune with calloused hands, starting as a carpenter before building a construction empire. He hated pretension. He hated waste. And now, seeing him reduced to a background prop in Anthony's show, my heart broke. I walked over to him, kneeling beside his chair. I placed my hand gently on his thin, papery hand resting on the armrest. "Hi, Grandpa," I whispered. "It's Emma." His fingers twitched beneath mine. For a second, I thought his eyelids fluttered, a tiny crack of blue showing through the lashes. But then he settled back into stillness. "Don't bother, Em," Anthony called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "He's checked out. Save your energy for the people who can actually appreciate it." I stiffened, my grip tightening on the packages in my lap. Anthony's arrogance was suffocating, but he had made a critical error in judgment. He saw weakness where there was only silence. He saw a checked-out old man where I saw the person who had taught me that silence was the loudest way to listen. I looked at Grandpa's face again. There was a tension in his jaw, a microscopic tightening of the muscle that I only recognized because I had spent hours watching him concentrate over blueprints when I was a child. He's listening, I thought, a sudden jolt of electricity running down my spine. He's not asleep. He's waiting. "I brought gifts," I said, standing up and turning to face the room. "For everyone." "Oh, lovely," Margaret said, her tone flat. "Put them under the tree, dear. We'll open them. Eventually." Anthony was just telling us about his new Porsche. "Actually," Anthony interrupted, setting his drink down. "Let's see what the little schoolteacher scraped together this year. I could use a good laugh." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't the same little girl they used to bully, and Grandpa Oscar wasn't as checked out as they prayed he was. To understand why that moment in the living room felt like a guillotine blade hovering over my neck, you have to understand the history. Anthony and I weren't always like this. When we were kids, before the money really started pouring in from the family trust, and before our father passed away, we were a team. We used to build forts in the backyard, scraping our knees and promising to always have each other's backs. But then the inheritance talk started. The expectations shifted. Anthony was the boy, the heir, the one destined to carry the family name into boardrooms and country clubs. I was just Emma, the dreamer, the one who cried over injured birds and spent her allowance on art supplies instead of stocks. I had sacrificed everything to stay in their orbit. When Dad got sick, I was the one who moved home to care for him while Anthony was too busy closing deals in Hong Kong. I wiped the vomit, I managed the meds, I held Dad's hand when he took his last breath. Anthony flew in for the funeral, cried beautifully on the podium, and then left the next morning. And Margaret, she worshipped the ground Anthony walked on because he was the reflection of the life she wanted. I was the reminder of the messy, emotional, unglamorous reality of caretaking. Anthony walked over to me now, circling me like a predator inspecting weak prey. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. He reached out and plucked one of the brown paper packages from my hands. "Heavy," he muttered, weighing it. "What is it, Emma? Another knitted scarf, a macaroni picture frame." "It's not macaroni," I said quietly, holding my ground. "It's a vintage clock, 1920s Art Deco. I found it in a salvage yard completely rusted over. I spent 4 months restoring the gear mechanisms by hand. I replated the brass myself." I looked at Margaret. "And for you, Mom? Inside that box is the original first edition of Little Women you told me you lost when you were a girl. The spine was broken, so I learned bookbinding just to fix it for you. I matched the leather perfectly." For a second, silence hung in the room. Genuine effort, time, and love sat in those boxes. Then Anthony scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "So," he said, looking around the room with a smirk, "you went dumpster diving. That's your gift. Garbage you polished up because you can't afford to buy us anything real." "It's not garbage," I said, my voice trembling. "It's restoration. It's preserving history. It's cheap," Anthony cut in, his voice hardening. The charm was gone, replaced by the cold, metallic edge of the antagonist who had been waiting to emerge. "Let's be honest, Emma. You're nearly 30. You drive a car that sounds like a lawnmower. You work a job that barely covers rent. And you come here to this house, bringing us used junk and expecting a pat on the head." He dropped the box. He didn't toss it gently. He let it fall from shoulder height. The sound of shattering glass and crunching gears echoed through the silent room. My heart stopped. The Art Deco clock, 4 months of late nights, 4 months of finding the perfect replacement springs, gone in a second. "Oops," Anthony said, not looking sorry in the least. He stepped over the wreckage and looked at Margaret. "See, Mom, this is what happens when you encourage her mediocrity. She thinks effort is a currency. It's not. Results are, money is." Margaret looked at the broken box, then at me. For a fleeting moment, I saw shame in her eyes. But then she looked at Anthony, shining, successful, powerful Anthony, and the shame vanished, replaced by a steely resolve to side with the winner. "Anthony is right, dear," she said, taking a sip of her champagne. "It is a bit embarrassing. Maybe next year just ask us for a loan if you're struggling this much. We can't have you bringing trash into the house." Anthony leaned in close to me, his voice a low, venomous hiss that only I could hear. "Do yourself a favor, Em. Go home. You don't fit here. You never have. I'm doing you a kindness by telling you. When Grandpa kicks the bucket, the will is already set. The house, the portfolio, the control, it's all mine. And I'm not going to have a charity case sister dragging down my brand." He smirked, glancing at my boots again. "Maybe I'll hire you as a maid. You seem good at cleaning up messes." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. The humiliation was total. They stripped me naked in front of our relatives, mocking the only thing I had to give, my time and my love. But as Anthony stepped back, looking triumphant, I saw something he missed. Grandpa Oscar's hand, the one resting on the armrest, had curled into a fist so tight his knuckles were white, and his eyes were no longer closed. They were open, just a sliver, fixed directly on the shattered box on the floor. The sound of the clock hitting the floor didn't echo forever, but the silence that followed felt like it would stretch into eternity. I looked down at the wreckage. The brass gears I had meticulously polished, removing decades of grime until they shone like gold, were scattered across the Persian rug. The glass face was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks obscuring the numbers I had hand-painted. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange, cold clarity washed over me, numbing the sting of humiliation. It was as if a switch had been flipped in my brain, diverting power from my heart to my head. "Well," I said, my voice shockingly steady. I crouched down, ignoring the way my knees popped in the quiet room, and began to pick up the pieces. "I suppose that answers that." "Don't be dramatic, Emma," Margaret said, though her voice wavered a cell. Idly, she took a nervous sip of her champagne. "Anthony didn't mean to drop it. It was an accident." "It wasn't an accident, Mom," I said, standing up with the broken remains cradled in my arms. I looked Anthony dead in the eye. He was still smirking, but the smirk faltered slightly under my direct gaze. "And we both know it." I turned to Grandpa Oscar. His eyes were closed again, but his hand was still clenched in a fist. I wanted to run to him, to shake him awake, to beg him to say something. But I knew that if I caused a scene now, I would just be the hysterical sister Anthony wanted me to be. I had to be smarter. "Merry Christmas," I said softly. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the heavy oak door. I closed it with a soft, definitive click. The walk to my car felt miles long. The snow was falling harder now, biting at my exposed face, but the cold felt grounding. I tossed the broken box into the passenger seat, a heap of wasted effort, and climbed behind the wheel. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline dump leaving me weak. I started the car, but I didn't put it in drive. I sat there, the heater blasting cold air, and stared at the lit windows of the house. I watched as shadows moved in the living room. Anthony was probably pouring another drink, spinning a story about how unstable I was. Why is he so aggressive this year? The thought nagged at me. Anthony had always been arrogant, but this was different. This was desperate, the way he had snapped about the people who matter. The way he was flaunting the Porsche and the zoning approval. It felt performative. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the ignition, but instead, I opened the browser. I remembered the name of the development project he had been bragging about inside, the Harborview Heights. He claimed the zoning board had given him carte blanche. I was a teacher, yes, but before I specialized in special ed, I had started a degree in urban planning. I knew how to navigate public records. I typed in the city's municipal planning database. It was public information, accessible to anyone who knew where to look. I found the docket for Harborview Heights. My breath hitched. Status rejected. Date December 22nd. Reason failure to secure financing. Environmental impact assessment failed. He didn't just get rejected, he was broke. The financing failure meant his investors had pulled out. The Porsche, the wine, the arrogance, it was all a facade. He wasn't just trying to push me out of the family because he looked down on me. He was pushing me out because he needed the entirety of Grandpa's estate to cover his massive debts. He was drowning, and I was the only life raft he intended to puncture. A realization hit me like a physical blow. He isn't just a bully, he's a fraud. And he's trying to steal Grandpa's legacy to pay for his mistakes. I wasn't just the victim of a bad Christmas anymore. I was the only witness to a heist in progress. I sat in the idling car at the end of the long driveway, the data on my phone screen glowing like an accusation in the dark. I could have just driven away. I could have gone back to my small apartment, cried into a pillow, and let them destroy themselves. But then I looked at the broken clock next to me. I thought about Grandpa's hands, calloused and strong, teaching me how to sand wood. I thought about the fist he made on the armrest. I wasn't going to let Anthony liquidate a lifetime of Grandpa's hard work to pay for a failed condo complex. I hit the call button for Margaret. I watched through the windshield as she picked up her phone in the living room. "Emma," she answered, her voice tight with annoyance. "If you're calling to apologize for storming out." "Put me on speaker, Mom," I cut her off. My voice was hard, unrecognizable to my own ears. "Now." "Excuse me." "Put me on speaker. Anthony needs to hear this." There was a pause and then a rustling sound. "Fine, you're on speaker. Anthony is right here. Make it quick, we're about to open the real gifts." "Go ahead, Em." Anthony's voice floated through the line, dripping with amusement. "Tell us how sorry you are." "I'm not sorry," I said, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I just thought you should know that I'm looking at the city planning database right now." Silence, dead silence. "I see the file for Harborview Heights, Anthony," I continued, keeping my tone clinically detached. "It says the application was rejected 3 days ago. It says the primary reason was failure to secure capital. It looks like the bank pulled your funding." That's outdated info," Anthony stammered. The smooth, confident baritone cracked. "The system hasn't updated. I fixed that this morning." "Really?" I pressed. "Because I also see a lien filed against your personal residence in the city as of yesterday. Public record is a funny thing, isn't it?" I heard a glass set down hard on a table. "Imam," I said, directing my voice to her. "He's lying to you. There is no zoning approval. There is no development. He's broke. He's trying to push me out of the will because he needs Grandpa's money to stay out of bankruptcy court." "That's a lie," Anthony roared. The sound was so loud it distorted on the speaker. "She's lying, Mom. She's jealous. She's always been jealous of my success. She's making this up because she drives a piece of junk car and lives in a shoebox." "It's on the screen, Anthony," I said calmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Do you want me to send the screenshot to Mom, or should I forward it to Grandpa's lawyer?" "You shut your mouth," he screamed. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're nothing. You're a nobody teacher with a savior complex. If you send anything to anyone, I swear to God, Emma, I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this town again." "Anthony," Margaret gasped, "calm down." "No," he yelled. "She's trying to sabotage me. Get off the phone, Emma. Get out of here. No one wants you here." The line went dead. He had hung up. I stared at the phone, my chest heaving. His reaction, the explosion, the threats, the sheer panic, had confirmed everything. A successful man laughs off a false accusation. A guilty man screams. I had shattered the illusion. I had exposed the rot at the center of his golden life, but I hadn't won. If anything, I had just made him more dangerous. He was a cornered animal now, and he had physical proximity to the one person who mattered, Grandpa. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the estate, but I didn't go home. I drove 2 miles down the road to a 24-hour diner, the tires crunching on the fresh snow. I needed a neutral ground, somewhere with Wi-Fi and coffee, to figure out my next move. My phone started buzzing incessantly. Text messages from Anthony. "You think you're so smart, keep your mouth shut or else. Mom doesn't believe you, she knows you're pathetic." I ignored them. I set my laptop up on the sticky Formica table and ordered a black coffee. I needed to build a case. If Anthony was desperate enough to lie about his business, what else was he lying about? I logged into my email and searched for Grandpa. Years ago, when Grandpa's health first started to decline, he had CC'd me on an email to his lawyer, Mr. Henderson. It was a simple email about updating some beneficiary details, but it meant I had Henderson's contact information. It was 8:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. No lawyer would answer, but I had to try. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up and leave a voicemail when a gruff voice answered. "This is the emergency line for Henderson Law. Who is this?" Mr. Henderson, I asked, my voice trembling. This is Emma, Oscar's granddaughter. There was a long pause. Emma, good Lord, I haven't heard from you in years. Is Oscar okay? Did he pass? No, I said quickly. He's alive, but I'm worried. I think Anthony is manipulating him. I think Anthony is in financial trouble and is trying to isolate Grandpa. Join the club, Henderson muttered. I've been trying to get a meeting with Oscar for 3 months. Every time I call the house, your brother tells me Oscar is too sick or sleeping or confused. He's effectively blocked me from my own client. He's not confused, I said, the memory of Grandpa's clenched fist burning in my mind. I saw him tonight. He was pretending to sleep, Mr. Henderson. He was listening. He knows what's happening. He was playing possum? Henderson asked, his tone sharpening. That sounds like Oscar. Look, Emma, if you have proof of Anthony's financials, email it to me. Now. I have the public records, I said. I'm sending them. Good, because here's the thing, Emma. Henderson lowered his voice. Your grandfather isn't as helpless as they think. He called me. I nearly dropped the phone. What? About 10 minutes ago, Henderson said. I assume right after you left, he must have a burner phone stashed in that chair of his. He sounded weak, but he was furious. He told me what Anthony did to your clock. Tears sprang to my eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. Grandpa had seen. He did care. He wants to see me, Henderson continued. Tomorrow morning, 8:00 a.m. sharp. He wants to revise the estate plan. He was very specific. He said, I want to cut the rot out. Anthony won't let you in, I warned. He's desperate. He threatened me. Let him try, Henderson said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. I'm bringing a notary and a witness, and I want you there, Emma. Can you meet us at the gates at 7:50 a.m.? I'll be there, I promised. Good, get some sleep, kid. You're going to need it. Tomorrow isn't going to be Christmas morning. It's going to be a war. I hung up and looked out the diner window. The snow was coming down in sheets now, burying the world in white. My phone buzzed again, another text from Anthony. I just convinced Mom to change the locks. Don't bother coming back. I stared at the screen and felt a cold, hard smile touch my lips. He thought locking the doors would save him. He didn't realize that the house wasn't the fortress he thought it was. It was a trap, and he had just locked himself inside with the one person who had the power to destroy him. You forgot one thing, Anthony, I thought, typing a quick reply to Mr. Henderson confirming the time. You forgot that Grandpa built that house. He knows every door, every lock, and exactly how to dismantle it all. Christmas morning dawned not with the soft glow of peace, but with the steel-gray light of a reckoning. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night in my car parked a block away from the estate, running the heater intermittently to save gas. At 7:45 a.m., a sleek black town car rolled silently up the street. Mr. Henderson stepped out, flanked by 2 serious-looking individuals, a notary and a large man who I assumed was security. I got out of my car and walked toward them, the snow crunching loudly under my boots. Morning, Emma, Henderson said, his breath plumed in the cold air. He looked ready for battle, clutching a leather briefcase like a shield. You ready? Yes, I said. My stomach was a knot of anxiety, but my resolve was iron. Let's do this. We approached the front gate. It was closed, the electronic keypad glowing red. Henderson didn't bother buzzing. He pulled a remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The gates groaned and swung open. Oscar gave me the master code years ago, Henderson winked, just in case. We walked up the driveway. The house stood silent and imposing, the windows dark. We reached the front door, and Henderson rang the bell, a long, insistent chime that echoed deep within the house. Moments later, the door was yanked open. Anthony stood there, wearing a silk robe, his hair disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes widened when he saw the group of us. What is this? He demanded, trying to block the doorway. It's Christmas morning. Henderson, what the hell are you doing here? I have an appointment with my client, Henderson said calmly, stepping forward. He's asleep, Anthony snapped, planting his feet. He's not seeing anyone, especially not her. He glared at me with pure venom. I told you, Emma, you're not welcome here. Actually, a rasping voice came from behind him. She is the only one welcome here. Anthony spun around. Grandpa Oscar was standing in the hallway. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He was leaning heavily on a cane, wearing his old tweed suit, the one he used to wear to board meetings. He looked frail, yes, but upright. His eyes were clear and burning with a fierce, cold light. Margaret stood behind him, looking pale and terrified, her hand covering her mouth. "Grandpa," Anthony stammered, his face draining of color. You shouldn't be walking. Let me help you back, too." "Don't touch me," Oscar commanded. The authority in his voice was like a whip crack. It stopped Anthony dead in his tracks. "Let them in," Oscar said. Anthony stepped aside, defeated by pure shock. We filed into the foyer. The house was exactly as I had left it, the tree, the opulence, but the atmosphere was suffocating. "Oscar, please," Margaret whispered. "What is going on?" "We're fixing a mistake," Oscar said. He shuffled into the living room and pointed to the dining table. "Sit down, all of you." We sat. Henderson opened his briefcase and laid out a stack of documents. The notary uncapped a pen. "Last night," Oscar began, his voice gathering strength, I listened. I listened to my grandson mock the only person in this family who actually understands the value of labor. I listened to him shatter a gift that took months to make. He looked at Anthony. "And then I listened to you lie. I heard you on the phone, Anthony. I heard you panic. I heard you threaten your sister to cover up your own incompetence." "Grandpa, wait," Anthony pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's a misunderstanding. The business is fine. I was just stressed. I didn't mean those things." "Henderson," Oscar said, ignoring him, "read the findings." Henderson picked up a sheet of paper. "We ran a full audit of the trust activity overnight, per Oscar's request. Anthony, over the last 6 months, you have attempted to withdraw funds from the principal estate 3 times. Each time was blocked by the trustees. You also forged Oscar's signature on a collateral loan application for the Harborview project." Margaret gasped, "Forged, Anthony, is this true?" Anthony looked like a trapped rat. I was going to pay it back. It was a bridge loan. I just needed a little time." "You tried to mortgage my house," Oscar said, his voice low and dangerous. "The house I built with my own hands to pay for your ego." Oscar reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet bag. He poured the contents onto the table. It was the gears and springs from the broken clock. He had picked them up. "Emma spent months fixing something broken," Oscar said, looking at the pile of metal. "She brought it back to life. You just break things, and I am done letting you break this family." Oscar looked at Henderson. "Do it." Henderson slid a document toward Oscar. "This is the revocation of the previous will and the establishment of a new living trust. Effective immediately, Anthony is removed as executor. He is removed as a beneficiary. He receives nothing." "Nothing," Anthony screamed. He slammed his hands on the table, standing up. "You can't do that. I'm the heir. I'm the only one who knows how to run the assets. She's a school teacher. She's a nobody." "She," Oscar said, signing the document with a steady hand, "is the only one who matters. Because she knows that value isn't a price tag. It's character." Oscar handed the pen to the notary. It was done. "Get out," Oscar said to Anthony. "What?" "Get out of my house," Oscar repeated. "The locks were changed last night, Anthony, but not the ones you thought. Your key doesn't work anymore. My security team is waiting outside to escort you off the property." Anthony looked at Margaret, pleading, "Mom, do something." Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the ugliness, the greed, the entitlement. She looked at me, sitting quietly with my hands folded, the girl she had dismissed for years. "You lied to me, Anthony," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You broke her clock, and you lied to me." She turned away. Anthony let out a scream of pure, primal frustration, a sound of entitlement dying a violent death. He swept the papers off the table, kicked a chair over, and stormed out. We heard the front door slam, and then, a minute later, his voice screaming in the driveway as the security team escorted him away. It was a scream that echoed down the block, a final, ugly note to end his reign. The silence that followed Anthony's departure was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a fever breaking. I looked at Grandpa Oscar. He seemed to deflate slightly, the adrenaline fading, leaving him looking tired and old again. But he was smiling. "Grandpa," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You didn't have to do all that. I would have been fine." "No, you wouldn't have," he rasped, squeezing my fingers. "And neither would I was letting them bury me before I was dead, Emma. Thank you for waking me up." He looked at the pile of clock gears on the table. Do you think you could fix it again?" I smiled, tears blurring my vision. "I can try, I have all the parts." "Good," he said. "Take your time, we have time now." In the months that followed, the fallout was messy, but necessary. Anthony faced fraud charges for the loan application. Grandpa refused to shield him from the legal consequences. He was forced to sell his Porsche and his condo to pay his legal fees. Last I heard, he was working as a junior sales associate at a car dealership 2 towns over, living in a studio apartment. Margaret struggled. The illusion of her perfect family was shattered, but in the ruins, we started to build something real. She started therapy. She stopped criticizing my clothes. Last week, she even asked if she could come to my classroom and volunteer reading to the kids. It's a start. As for me, I moved into the estate to help care for Grandpa. I didn't quit my job. I love teaching too much, but I did turn the old carriage house into a restoration workshop. Every evening, after work, I sit with Grandpa by the fire. He tells me stories about the buildings he constructed, and I tell him about my students. On the mantelpiece, ticking steadily with a heartbeat of brass and steel, sits the Art Deco clock. It's not perfect. You can see the hairline cracks in the glass where I glued it back together. The case has a few dents that I couldn't quite smooth out, but Grandpa says he likes it better this way. He says the cracks show that it survived, that it was loved enough to be saved. And I suppose, in the end, that's what we all are. A little broken, a little battered, but ticking on, louder and stronger than before.